Welcome to Dark Leaves Whisper. If you enjoyed this, please subscribe, comment where you're listening from, and share this with others.
I never really believed in ghosts. Like, at all. I know that sounds cliché, because everyone says that right before something crazy happens. But seriously, I was that person. The one who would hear a ghost story and say, "Bro, you're probably just tired." Or, "Your brain is literally messing with you." I always looked for the logical explanation first. Old houses make noises. Pipes make weird sounds. Your imagination gets wild when you're alone at night. That was always my mindset. Until I started hearing someone call my name from a room that wasn't supposed to exist. My name is Jason, and this happened about 2 years ago when I was 24. At the time, I was going through a pretty rough period. I had just quit my job. I was trying to figure out what I wanted to do with my life. And honestly, I just needed somewhere quiet. You know that feeling? When everything around you is moving way too fast, and you just want a reset. That was me. My grandmother had recently passed away, and my family still owned her old house outside of town. Nobody wanted to stay there. My parents thought it would be better if someone lived there temporarily, while we figured out what to do with it. So, I volunteered. Looking back, I probably shouldn't have. The house wasn't creepy when I first arrived. Actually, it was kind of nice. It was one of those old houses with personality. Wood floors, old family pictures, a kitchen that looked like it hadn't changed since the 90s. But there was something about the place. Not scary, just quiet. Too quiet. Like the house was waiting. My first few nights were completely normal. I unpacked, watched Netflix, ordered some food. Nothing weird happened. Honestly, I started thinking everyone was overreacting. I remember texting my friend, "Bro, this house is boring. Everyone made it sound haunted." He replied, "Give it a week." I laughed. I had no idea how right he was. It happened on my 4th night. I was sitting downstairs around midnight, scrolling through my phone. The house was completely silent. Then I heard it. "Jason." I froze. Not because it was terrifying, because it sounded normal. Like someone calling me from another room. I looked toward the hallway. "Yeah?" Nothing. I waited. Maybe someone was outside. Maybe a neighbor. Maybe the TV. I walked around, checking every room. Nothing. The front door was locked. The windows were closed. Nobody was there. I remember standing in the hallway thinking, okay, that was weird. But I brushed it off. 3 nights later, it happened again. This time, I was making coffee, probably around 6 in the morning. The house was still dark. Then, "Jason." This time, it came from upstairs, from my grandmother's old bedroom. I just stood there. I don't know how long, maybe 30 seconds, maybe a minute. My brain was fighting itself. One side of me was saying, "Go check." The other side was saying, "Absolutely not." Eventually, I went upstairs. The bedroom door was slightly open. That bothered me, because I remembered closing it. I always closed it. I pushed the door open. Nothing, just an empty room. Old furniture, boxes, dust. I looked around. Then I noticed something. The closet door was moving, just slightly, back and forth, like someone had opened it and walked away. I left the room immediately. I'm not even embarrassed to admit that. I went downstairs, grabbed my keys, and sat in my car. At that point, I was thinking, okay, maybe I'm not built for this. I sat there for almost 20 minutes. Then I convinced myself I was being ridiculous. I went back inside. But I slept with the lights on that night. The next morning, I called my mum. I tried to make it sound casual. Hey, random question. She immediately knew something was wrong. What happened? I laughed. No, nothing. I was just wondering, did Grandma ever talk about hearing things in the house? A few seconds passed. Then she said, "Why are you asking?" That question alone bothered me, because she didn't laugh. I told her what happened, and she got quiet. Then she said something I still think about. Your grandma used to say she heard your grandfather after he died. I remember rolling my eyes. Mom, no, listen. Her voice changed. She said he would call her name from the bedroom. I didn't know what to say, because my grandfather had been gone for years. After that, things got worse. Not dramatic movie stuff. Nothing flying across the room. Nothing crazy. Just little things. Things you can explain individually, but together, they start feeling different. A chair moved. A door opened. Footsteps upstairs when I was downstairs. The smell of my grandmother's perfume appearing randomly. And every once in a while, I would hear, Jason. The final night was the night I left. I was packing my stuff. I remember thinking, tomorrow morning, I'm done. I was almost finished when I heard it. Jason. This time, it wasn't upstairs. It wasn't down the hallway. It was right behind me. I turned around. Nobody. But the hallway light flickered, and at the end of the hallway, my grandmother's bedroom door was open. Inside was completely dark. Then, I heard breathing. Not loud, not aggressive, just someone standing there, waiting. That was enough. I grabbed my keys. I left. I didn't even lock the door. I drove to a friend's house and stayed there for almost a week. A month later, my family sold the house. Before the new owners moved in, my mom called me. She asked, "Did you ever hear anything in Grandma's room?" I said, "Yeah." Then she went quiet. Finally, she said, "Did you know your grandfather's name was Jason?" I laughed. I thought she was joking, but she wasn't. Then she said, "Your grandmother never called you Jason." To this day, I don't know what happened in that house. Maybe grief leaves something behind. Maybe memories can attach themselves to places. Maybe old houses remember the people who live there. Or maybe, sometimes when someone calls your name, they're not trying to scare you. Maybe they're just reminding you they never really left. I never really believed in ghosts. I was born in America. I grew up with technology, school, work, and a normal, modern life. The stories about spirits, ancestors, and shamans were part of my culture, but I never thought they would become part of my life. Until my grandfather passed away. After his funeral, I started having the same dream over and over. I would be standing outside my childhood home, the trees, the driveway, the old wooden door. Then I would see my grandfather standing there. He never looked angry. He never looked frightening. He would just look at me, like he was waiting. Then he would say my childhood nickname, a name nobody had called me in years. I always woke up right after that. At first, I told myself it was just grief. My mind was trying to hold on to someone I missed. But then, my mum called me one day. She asked, "Have you been dreaming about Grandpa?" I didn't answer. I asked her how she knew. She became quiet and said, "Because I have too." That was when things started feeling different. Small things. Things I could explain, at first. I would wake up smelling the incense my grandfather used to burn. But nobody had burned anything. I would hear footsteps outside my bedroom, even when there was nobody there. One night, I woke up because I heard someone sitting in my living room. When I turned on the light, nobody was there. But the chair across from the couch was pulled out. That was when I finally told my family. A few days later, a Hmong shaman came to my apartment. Honestly, I expected something dramatic, but he was calm. He didn't come in acting like he was fighting something. He simply asked questions. When did it start? What happened before it began? Who had recently passed away? Then we reached my apartment door. He stopped. I looked at him. I said, "Aren't you coming inside?" He shook his head. "No." I asked why. He looked toward my apartment. Then he said, "There is nothing inside your home." "But something has been trying to reach you." I didn't know what to say. The ceremony that followed wasn't what I expected. It was about restoring balance and understanding what was happening. My family believed my grandfather wasn't trying to harm me. He was trying to remind me of something. After everything was finished, the shaman told me, "Not everything that returns comes back to hurt you." Since that day, the dreams stopped. The footsteps stopped. Everything went back to normal. But every year on the anniversary of my grandfather's passing, something strange happens. Still happening. Just a reminder. A familiar smell. A memory. A feeling that someone is nearby. I still don't know what happened. Maybe grief changes the way we experience things. Maybe traditions exist because generations before us understood things we don't fully see. Or maybe some connections are stronger than death, because sometimes the people we lose aren't completely gone.
I never thought the scariest memory from my childhood would come from my grandparents' farm, because honestly, it was one of my favorite places. Every summer, my family would make the drive out to Missouri to visit my grandma and grandpa. For us kids, it felt like we were leaving the real world behind. No busy streets, no traffic, no neighbors complaining about us making too much noise. Just open fields, dirt roads, and a huge piece of land where we could run around all day. My cousins would come from different states, and whenever everyone got together, the farm became our entire world. The adults would spend most of their time outside talking, cooking, and catching up. The older relatives would sit around telling stories. The little kids would run around the yard. And us older kids, we would disappear. The place we always went was the old barn. It was huge. At least it felt huge to us. The wooden doors were tall enough for trucks to drive through. There were stacks of hay, old tools hanging on the walls, and little corners where we could hide from each other. During the day, the barn felt like an adventure. It was our clubhouse, our playground, our escape. But at night, it felt different. I was probably around 10 years old when it happened. Back then, we didn't have smartphones or tablets to keep us busy. We made our own games. One of the games we loved playing was something we called the clap game. It was simple. One person would be blindfolded and stand in the middle. Everyone else would hide. The person in the middle would clap, and whoever was hiding would clap back. The person wearing the blindfold had to follow the sound and find everyone. That was it. Nothing complicated. Just kids being kids. We played it all the time. During the day. In the yard. Inside the barn. It was just a fun memory. At least, that's what I thought. The night everything changed was during one of our family gatherings. The sun had already gone down. The adults were still outside talking. The younger kids had gone inside. But my cousins and I were still running around. Someone suggested we play the clap game one more time before we had to go. I remember laughing. I remember thinking it was no big deal. I volunteered to be the one who was blindfolded. My cousin tied a piece of cloth around my eyes. Ready? I laughed. Yeah. Everyone ran off. I could hear their footsteps moving through the barn. Some went upstairs into the loft. Some hid behind the hay. Some ran outside. Then, everything became quiet. I stood there in the darkness. I couldn't see anything. I could only hear the wind outside and the sound of the barn settling. Then I clapped. Clap. A few seconds later, clap. Someone answered from my left. I smiled. I knew someone was hiding near the old wooden wall. I walked toward the sound. I reached out. Got you! My cousin laughed. Already? I removed him from the game. Then I clapped again. Clap! Another response. This one came from behind the hay. I followed it, found another cousin. Everyone was laughing. We were having fun. Until I heard one more clap. Clap. I stopped, because this one was different. It came from deeper inside the barn, a place we didn't usually go, the far corner, where old farming equipment was stored. I remember laughing nervously, thinking one of my cousins was trying to scare me. Nice try. I walked toward it. Clap. Again. Closer. But something felt wrong, because I couldn't hear anyone laughing anymore. No footsteps. No whispering. Nothing. Just that sound. I walked deeper into the barn. My hand reached out in front of me. The darkness felt heavier. Then I stopped, because I realized something. I knew where everyone was hiding. I had already found them. So who was left? I slowly removed the blindfold. Nobody was there. The corner was empty. No cousin. No hiding place. Nothing. I immediately walked back toward the entrance. When I stepped outside, all my cousins were standing there, looking at me, confused. One of them said, "Where were you going?" I looked at him. "What do you mean?" He pointed behind me. "You went all the way to the back," I said, "because someone was hiding there." Nobody laughed. Nobody answered. Then my cousin said something that made my stomach drop. We were all outside. At first, we thought someone was joking. Maybe one of the older kids was trying to scare us. So we told our grandparents. I expected them to laugh. I expected them to tell us we were being dramatic. But my grandma didn't laugh. She just looked at us. Then she asked, "What time did you play?" We told her. She looked toward the barn. Then she said, "Don't play that game there anymore." I remember asking, "Why?" She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Because sometimes, not everything that answers you is a person." After that night, we never played the game in the barn again. Eventually, we all grew up. My cousins moved away. People got jobs, started families. The farm became a place we only visited occasionally. Years passed. And honestly, I stopped thinking about that night. I convinced myself there had to be an explanation. Maybe someone was hiding. Maybe I heard something else. Maybe my memory changed over time. That's what I told myself. Until I visited the farm again as an adult. I was probably around 28 when I went back to Missouri. The barn was still standing. Older. Weathered. But still there. I walked inside. The same smell. The same wooden beams. The same place where we spent our childhood summers. I walked toward the back corner. The place where I heard the clap. And that's when I noticed something carved into one of the wooden posts. A small handprint, like a child had pressed their hand into wet paint or mud. Underneath it were two words that made me freeze. My turn. I asked my grandma about it later. She looked at me strangely. Then she asked, "You heard it too?" I didn't know what to say, because I had never told her the exact place where I heard the sound. I asked her what she meant. She just smiled sadly and said, "When children play, sometimes they don't realize who is playing with them." I still don't know what happened that night. Maybe it was just a childhood memory that grew bigger over time. Maybe someone was hiding that we never found. Or maybe some places remember the people who spent time there. Because every time I hear someone clap twice, I think about that old barn in Missouri. And I wonder, who was waiting for their turn? When my little sister was 5 years old, she had an imaginary friend. At least, that's what we thought. And honestly, nobody in my family thought much about it. Kids do that all the time. They talk to toys. They create imaginary worlds. They have conversations with people who aren't there. It's normal. That's what my parents told me. That's what I told myself. But looking back now, I don't think my sister was pretending. I think she was talking to someone who was actually there. I grew up in a Hmong-American family in the Midwest. My parents worked hard. My grandparents lived close enough that we saw them often. Like many Hmong families, our home was always busy. There were always relatives visiting, food cooking, people talking, kids running around. Our house wasn't fancy, but it was full of life. The place my sister loved the most was the backyard. We had a large yard with an old tree near the fence. It wasn't anything special, just an old tree that had been there longer than I could remember. My sister would spend hours outside playing near it. She would bring toys, talk to herself, sing songs, normal kid stuff, until one afternoon, I heard her talking to someone. I was about 12 years old at the time. I was sitting inside playing a video game when I heard my sister laughing outside. At first, I ignored it, but then I heard her say, "Okay, I'll tell you." I remember thinking, who is she talking to? I looked out the window. She was sitting under the tree, by herself. I went outside. "Who are you talking to?" She looked at me like I had asked the strangest question. She pointed toward the tree. "Him." I looked around. Nobody was there. I laughed. "Him who?" She smiled. "The man who sits here." I remember feeling a little uncomfortable. But I was 12. I wasn't about to admit I was scared. So I joked with her. "You know, nobody is there, right?" She looked confused. "He's right there." She pointed again, right next to the tree. That night, I told my parents. My mom smiled. She said, "She has an imagination." My dad laughed. "She has an invisible friend." Everyone thought it was cute. And for a while, I did too. Until she started saying things that didn't make sense. A few weeks later, my sister came inside after playing outside. She looked upset. My mom asked, "What happened?" My sister said, "He's sad today." My mom asked, "Who?" She answered, "The old man." My mom looked at me. I shrugged. Then my sister said, "He misses the house." That was strange, because we had never told her anything about anyone missing our house. I asked, "What old man?" She looked at me. "The one who used to live here." I remember laughing, because I thought she was making things up, but my mom didn't laugh. She got quiet, really quiet. She asked my sister, "What does he look like?" My sister didn't hesitate. She said, "He has white hair. He wears a jacket. He sits under the tree, and he always looks toward the house." My mom stopped what she was doing. She looked at my dad. They didn't say anything. At the time, I didn't understand why. But later, I found out. That weekend, my grandparents came over. My mom told my grandma what my sister had been saying. My grandma didn't look scared. She looked surprised. She asked my sister, "What else does he tell you?" My sister said, "He tells me stories." My grandma asked, "What kind of stories?" My sister shrugged. "Stories about when he was young." Then she said something that made everyone stop. He said he used to sit with Grandpa under this tree. Nobody spoke, because my grandfather had passed away before my sister was born. But that wasn't the part that bothered everyone. The part that bothered them was something else. My sister said, he said Grandpa was his little brother. I didn't understand. I looked at my parents. My mom finally explained. The old man my sister described sounded like my grandfather's older brother. Someone who had passed away many years before. Someone my sister had never met. Someone she had never even seen in a picture. My grandma went into another room. She came back holding an old photo album. She flipped through the pages. Then she stopped. She pointed at a picture. Is this him? My sister looked at the photo, and without hesitation, she nodded. That's him. The room became silent, because nobody had ever shown her that picture. After that day, my sister stopped talking about him as much. My parents didn't make a big deal about it. They didn't want to scare her. My grandma simply told us, children notice things adults forget. At the time, I thought she was just talking about imagination. But as I got older, I started understanding what she meant. Years passed. My sister grew up. She forgot many details about being a child. She forgot toys she used to have. She forgot games she played. She forgot things that seemed important back then. But one day, when we were adults, I brought up the old tree. I asked, do you remember that person you used to talk to? She looked at me, and surprisingly, she did. I asked, do you remember what he looked like? She smiled. Then she said, he looked like Grandpa. I laughed. No, not Grandpa, the other one. She looked confused. What other one? I froze, because I realized something. She never knew there was another one. She only knew what she saw. A few years later, my parents sold that house. The old tree was removed. The backyard was completely different. A new family lived there. Everything from my childhood was gone. But sometimes, I still think about my little sister sitting under that tree, talking to someone nobody else could see. Maybe it was just a child's imagination. Maybe her mind created a story from things she heard around the family. Maybe there was another explanation. I don't know. But there is one thing I still think about. My sister was 5 years old. She didn't know family history. She didn't know old names. She didn't know the people in those photographs. But somehow, she knew someone who had been gone for years. And even today, when I visit my parents' new house, sometimes I look out at the backyard, and I wonder, if children can see things adults cannot, what else have we stopped noticing? When I was a kid, I thought funerals were supposed to be quiet. I thought the sadness came from the crying, from the flowers, from watching family members say goodbye to someone they loved. I thought that was the hardest part, but I was wrong. Because every funeral I attended as a child, I heard something else. A song, a voice, a melody that nobody else seemed to notice. And for the longest time, I thought I was the only one. I grew up in a Hmong-American family in the Midwest. Like many families, ours was spread out. Some relatives lived nearby. Others lived in different states. So whenever something important happened, everyone came together. Weddings, New Year celebrations, family gatherings, and unfortunately, funerals. When I was young, I didn't fully understand death. I knew people were gone. I knew everyone was sad. But I didn't understand why adults whispered certain things, why grandparents stayed awake all night, why the house felt different when someone passed away. There were traditions my parents followed that I didn't completely understand. I just knew everyone was there to say goodbye. The first time I heard the singing, I was 7 years old. My great uncle had passed away. I remember the house being crowded. People were everywhere, relatives sitting together, food being prepared, adults speaking quietly. The younger kids were told to stay nearby and behave. I remember feeling bored. I didn't understand why everyone was so serious. Then, while sitting in the living room, I heard it. A man singing, quietly. almost like someone was humming an old song. I looked around. I thought maybe one of my uncles was singing, but nobody was. Everyone was talking. Everyone was busy. The sound continued. I walked toward the hallway. The singing became clearer, and that's when I realized something. It sounded like it was coming from the room where my great uncle was resting. I remember standing there, not scared, just confused. I asked my mom, "Who is singing?" She looked at me. "What do you mean?" I pointed. "Someone is singing in there." My mom looked toward the room, then back at me. She gently said, "No one is singing." I laughed, because I thought she was joking, but she wasn't. Years later, I would realize that was the first time it happened, but it wasn't the last. Every time someone in my family passed away, I heard the song. It was never the same. Different people, different voices, different melodies. Sometimes it sounded like someone humming. Sometimes it sounded like several voices together. Sometimes I heard words I didn't understand. But there was always one thing that stayed the same. The singing never sounded angry. It sounded peaceful, almost like someone was saying goodbye. When I was 10 years old, my grandfather noticed something. We were at another funeral. I was sitting quietly while everyone was talking. My grandfather sat next to me. He asked, "What do you hear?" I looked at him. I didn't know what he meant. He looked toward the room where the funeral was happening. Then he asked again, "The singing." My heart stopped, because nobody had ever asked me that before. I whispered, "You hear it too?" He didn't answer. He just looked at me. Then he asked, "What does it sound like?" I told him. I described the voice, the melody, the feeling it gave me. My grandfather listened quietly. Then he said something I never forgot. Some people spend their whole lives trying to hear things they cannot. Others spend their lives trying not to hear them. I didn't understand what he meant, not until years later. As I got older, I tried to ignore it. I told myself it was my imagination. Maybe I was hearing people talking. Maybe my brain was creating sounds because I was around death and sadness. That explanation made sense. It was easier to accept. Until one funeral changed everything. I was 14 years old when my grandfather's older brother became sick. The family knew he wasn't doing well. Everyone visited. Everyone spent time together. One night, while sitting in my room, I heard the singing again. But this time, something was different. The voice sounded familiar. I couldn't explain why. I just knew I had heard it before. I went to my mom and said, "Why is Grandpa singing?" She looked confused. "Your grandpa is asleep." "No," I said. "The other voice." She stared at me. What other voice? I didn't know how to explain it. 3 days later, my grandfather's brother passed away. After the funeral, my grandmother asked me something. She waited until nobody else was around. Then she said, "Did you hear him?" I looked at her. I didn't answer, because I knew exactly what she meant. She continued, "When I was young, my grandmother used to say that children sometimes notice things adults stop noticing." I asked, "What does that mean?" She smiled sadly. "It means not everything we experience has an explanation." As I got older, the singing stopped, slowly. I went years without hearing anything. I went to funerals. I said goodbye to relatives, but there was silence. Part of me was relieved. Another part of me wondered why it disappeared. Years later, I visited my grandmother. She was older. Her memory wasn't as strong as it used to be. While we were talking, she brought out an old box. Inside were pictures, letters, and an old recording. She looked at me and said, "I think you should listen to this." I asked what it was. She said, "Your great-grandmother." The recording was old. The quality wasn't good. At first, I only heard people talking, family members laughing, children running around. Then I heard it. A song, a melody, the same one I had heard when I was 7 years old. I froze because I had never heard that recording before. I looked at my grandmother. She was watching me carefully. I asked, "What song is that?" She smiled. "That was your great-grandmother's song." I didn't know what to say because that was impossible. The first time I heard that song, my great-grandmother had already been gone for years. I asked my grandmother, "How do you know this is the song?" She looked at me and said, "Because you told me when you were little." I sat there quietly, thinking about all those years, all those funerals, all those voices. Maybe there was a logical explanation. Maybe my mind connected memories in ways I didn't understand. Maybe grief creates things we need to hear. Or maybe some goodbyes are not meant to be silent. I don't hear the singing anymore. Not since I became an adult. But sometimes, when I attend a funeral, I find myself listening, waiting, wondering if that familiar melody will return. Because I spent years asking myself one question: why could I hear the dead singing? But now, I think I was asking the wrong question. Maybe the question was never why they were singing. Maybe the question was, why did they want me to listen?
Thank you for listening. If you enjoyed this, please like this video, leave a comment, subscribe so you don't miss what's next, and share this with others.